So, uh, again, I just kind of wanted to mention that, this lecture here should will be the end, a speedy end to a war that left a huge impact on the United States. Some argue the world, and I would have liked to address more, but I feel like you all, especially after getting the last two lectures that I'm going to add as an addition to mine at the end, a very strong sense of what this country has went through to get us to where we're at. And I'm hoping that it'll continue to help inform you of your current politics in a way that's much more sound and rational than sometimes what we see coming out of, well, there's that saying that Alexander Pope, the poet, said, "A little learning is a dangerous thing." Hopefully we'll continue to learn enough to not be so dangerous, right? Anyhow, moving on to just this part, women should always be included, right? But it is typical, as always, to kind of marginalize women, especially in war, because women, up until recent history or in certain pockets of other ancient, in ancient history, women were not allowed to or forced to basically be participants as soldiers in war. But we always forget, or at least men do, that especially when we're talking about wars, maybe not on the battle fronts, okay, where it's quote unquote man to man, but as Union troops start pushing through, women are going to be facing enemy troops. I've never had a chance to study or find information on how much rape may have taken place by Union soldiers against Confederate or Southern women. I've been wanting to explore that. I mean, when I say wanting, meaning, unfortunately, when you study almost every war, when there's enemy troops coming in, especially if there's a long, protracted war, gang rape and terrible things like that often take place. It's just an unfortunate part of the legacy of wars. And I'm certainly not saying that every army should be held responsible for that, and that's the case every time. But it tends to. Nazi Germany made a very aggressive act against the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union took terrible hits. But then when the Soviet soldiers came back and pushed through into Germany, there happened to be a lot of rapes of German women by Soviet soldiers. And what I'm just kind of trying to point out is that when there's a war, to say that women don't have a role or they're not affected because they're not directly involved in the trenches is really just a hideous overshadowing of the fact that entire societies are always affected by war, which women are 50% of the population. And for the women, as we remember, there was a kind of ideal of a Southern aristocratic woman that ends up changing. And even for the North, wars often with men being forced out of their homes, women have to take on a lot of chores and activities that normally maybe they weren't doing before. Okay, running businesses and household affairs, and then on top of that, also being caregivers and caretakers for the wounded. So I just kind of wanted to put us onto that discussion, and I'm going to point out that my knowledge should be stronger on women and the Civil War, and that's something that I need to work on. And so, for those of us who teach history, we don't magically know everything, and we also tend to get a lot more knowledge based on things that we focused on, and we have to sometimes re-examine what we've neglected to address. Okay, so I'm just going to put that out. And what you're going to see is I have the video that you are going to watch on Native Americans' involvement in the U.S. Civil War. Now that is me. I mean, I could have shown you so many videos on the U.S. Civil War, but I wanted to include a group of people who've been affected the most by this union that are not a part of the discussions that have taken place in terms of even the Civil War and the role of blacks. Again, the Native Americans are constantly being pushed, and they're going to be pushed and shut down, after the U.S. Civil War. And we have to kind of come to terms with that history a little bit better and show that they've also been fully participating in the process of the United States on so many levels that ignoring the Native Americans, like ignoring women and their role in these things, is really, I think, shameful. And so I just kind of want to point that out. All right, so what is fascinating to me, to switch gears here, about this U.S. Civil War and the role of Lincoln, is that while he did function as a dictator in many ways, one could argue in terms of suspending many civil liberties to fight this war, he didn't suspend the idea of having an election in the middle of a civil war. I think one could argue that most nation states would find a great excuse not to have elections in the middle of a civil war. And we're not just talking about a war. We're talking about a fully engaged battle where the whole entire future of a nation is depending on the outcome. It's not hard to imagine that many people would have said, okay, we can wait on this election thing, because what's the good of holding an election if you're not going to have a president surviving in the Civil War to begin with? So that's something that could have been argued. But in fact, Lincoln fought, he had a campaign against a Democratic candidate, George B. McClellan, and he won by more than 400,000 popular votes. Now, Lincoln did make a provision that soldiers could vote, which obviously is fair. But at the same time, we can say that Lincoln did make sure he maneuvered things to his advantage. And the soldier vote and the following battlefield successes that did take place would ultimately give Lincoln the victory. Okay? So that's something just to point out. Now, by the summer of 1864, there was 400,000 signatures asking legislature to end slavery. So that April, the Senate adopted the 13th Amendment and declared the end of slavery. Okay, and this is really, kind of how should we say, putting teeth into the declarations that were made earlier. Okay, so slavery was embedded in the Constitution initially with the 3/5 Compromise, and then the 13th Amendment nullified that. Okay, and so ultimately the Confederates would lose this war, and it was through hard-fought battles and quite brutal tactics on the part of the North. More than 600,000 Americans died. I mean, I want you to think about this. Compared to World War I, we lost 115,000, 318,000 in World War II. And this was Americans killing Americans. So more than what was combined in death from World War I and World War II. Americans killing Americans because one side of the political spectrum wanted to own human beings. And yeah, I mean, so I think it's an intense part of our history that requires much reflection and more education. I'm hoping this is your beginning of really studying this war in much more details and filling in many of the blank spots and parts which I didn't cover. And then you're going to watch these two other lectures And hopefully you will come out of this a much more aware and appreciative of how far we've gone, despite all of our imperfections that we still have right now. And perhaps we can keep improving. Okay.